completely stunned. It had never occurred to me in my entire life that anything like this would ever happen. But then they interviewed me for a while and asked me just a bunch of questions, I think, for their information as much as anything else. And so it went on. And at the end of all this, well, I thanked them profusely and said that I was deeply honored, of course, to receive the Nobel Prize, which I had never expected. And so after maybe 30 or 40 minutes, the conversation came to an end. And then very shortly afterwards, I started to get email. And then I had people banging on my door wanting to interview me. I think the first time was at 3 in the morning. There was someone banging on my door. I said, no, thank you, not at this time of night. A pair of electrons can tunnel through a barrier. And the probability of doing that is something that in principle is calculable. But all of these tunneling procedures are for single electrons or pairs of electrons. And what Michel Deveray and John Martinez and I figured out is that if you design the circuit properly, then you could actually have tunneling of very large objects. And that's where the macroscopic tunneling comes from. And that's the thing, combined with the energy quantization, that in the end won us the Nobel Prize, that we had understood that procedure and we had in particular understand how to calculate it. And this is 40 years ago. And all this came about in due course, not in a year or two, but over the years, that this sort of process is in fact part of our phone system. My iPhone basically works on that procedure. Also, there's an enormous effort now to generate various quantum devices that are leading to all kinds of very important informations, not the least of which is the quantum computer. And there's an enormous effort now to sort of develop all those procedures. This discovery, the idea of macroscopic quantum tunneling and energy quantization, can be used to make very sophisticated things that would not otherwise be possible to work out. You wouldn't be able to, I think you wouldn't have an iPhone today, and you certainly wouldn't have anything that looks like a quantum computer today, unless you had this discovery, because that enabled you to make things that originally we thought of. If you go back something like 100 years, that's when, first of all, quantum mechanics was invented. And quantum mechanics for decades was clearly really the subject of atoms. And the fact that our discovery enabled this to be applicable to something that you can consider to be, a giant atom, a gigantic atom. And that's what made all this other technology possible. This is an immensely serious problem. And I certainly know personally people who've lost most of their funding. And this will cripple much of the United States science research unless they reverse this procedure. And for example, it's not just physics. For example, the NIH, National Institutes of Health, have taken enormous hits in their funding for reasons that are entirely beyond any understanding that any of us have. But this is going to cripple science, and it is going to be disastrous. And if this continues, assuming that the present administration finally comes to an end, it may take a decade to get back to where we were, say, half a year ago. Michelle and John and I had no way of understanding the importance of this effect that actually led to our Nobel Prize. If you'd asked us 40 years ago, we would have said, well, yeah, it's an interesting thing. We're glad to have done this and we understand it, and move on. And you just don't know how it's going to evolve because other people will pick up on the idea and develop it. This Nobel Prize would not possibly have happened without all the work and all the insights that Michelle and John had. And I in principle, was the leader of the group, but the fact is that their contributions were absolutely vital and important. And as they just said, we would never have got this prize if they hadn't done all their hard work.